Hey guys, Fishmonger here. Today, I'm going to talk to you about something a little different. Today, I'm going to teach you how I made my very simple mining rig. Yeah, but as it turns out, it wasn't quite so simple. So when I started going on the internets and looking at all these other different rigs that people made and they had and they bought and I mean, for crying out loud, like a milk carton? Come on. But dang, that's some good Litecoin mining. I said to myself, these things are pretty simple. It's just some wood and some aluminum and slap some stuff together, bolt some stuff on, and bam, you've got a rig. I mean, look at this thing, 8 times GPU GTX 1090 Ti mining rig. Nice little mining rig. Except it's basically a huge, heavy shelf. So I said, I want to make something as small as I can. What's the smallest thing I can make? Because I kind of don't want a lot of stuff taking up a lot of room. So I started to notice a lot of people were using simple off-the-shelf things from, no pun intended, Home Depot, like racks like this, or like shoe racks, or mini coat racks, or dollhouse racks, or just small things that were prefabbed and put together. And I said, you know what? Maybe I could spend a couple of bucks and find something at the local Home Depot that I can just use. So I ended up with this, which was pretty much a very cheap $10 plastic rack. This thing was so cheap, the plastic cracked on me beyond too fast. It actually came with 4 shelves, and the rods, the vertical rods there, were actually longer. I just cut them down a little bit shorter, and obviously I took 2 racks off, and I slapped some stuff together, proof of concept. I had all the hardware. I didn't have it hooked up yet, so I just wanted to make sure it worked, and it was effective, and things were rolling, and this did. It worked. It was great, but it was just not quite my style. It was a little bit large, and I wanted to make it a little bit smaller and portable, and really I just wanted to make it from scratch. So I started laying some of my hardware down and just taking some rough measurements, and these are 5 of the GTX 1050s I have, and if I laid them a couple inches apart, standing up straight like this, I can see they were pretty much just about 16 inches end to end, which is kind of tiny as far as I'm concerned. You don't really see many 16-inch mining rigs. And it just so happens that the motherboard and power supply I have in the background there too fit within that 16-inch window. So I said, maybe I can work with that. So I opened up my CAD program here and started drawing some simple designs. And as you can see, things started off quite simple. I had some lines and a blue pen, and this is kind of what started out as. And then I did this. I said, well, what if I put the motherboard there? And that's about kind of where I wanted it. And I said, what if I put the power supply there? And I said, well, that's a pretty good spot. That would kind of work. And then what if I added a little height here. I gave it some 3-dimensional kind of flair there. I said, and you know what? I can make it fit. I can make everything fit underneath that back second rack. And then I drew in some other stuff, like some other wood. I started adding dimensions to that, and then my CAD software started crashing. It must have been a Windows issue because something wasn't coming together right here. Except you can make out a video card. Actually, it looks like a video card right there. But all in all, I said, hey, this is gonna work. You know what? There's only one thing I can do. Simplest thing I can do is just go out, buy a bunch of wood, which I did. I bought way too much wood. In fact, apparently when I estimate board feet for wood, I suck at it. But this is just standard 1.5 inch by 3/4 inch common wood. It was 5 feet long, and it was pretty cheap, just $2 or $3 a pop. So I figured I'd get like 20 bucks worth and see what I can do. So, being the handy guy that I was, I figured I'd start grabbing some of the hardware that I would need to put this together. I grabbed my drill, my saber saw, a ruler, a straight edge ruler, a tape measure. I got my DeWalt drills, a couple of things, a yards, tavern porter. Very important that you must drink when you're operating heavy machinery or anything that could potentially hurt yourself. It's definitely a must. I picked up some cheap screws at Home Depot also, some 1 5/8 inch drywall screws. I know they're not wood screws, but I tell you what, anything I build, I can build with drywall screws, and it ends up working out fine. And they're cheap, and you can always get them at whatever length you want, so it worked out pretty good. And I got some number 4 by 1/2 inch wood screws, and those were just to screw in some miscellaneous components into the rig as I was building it. So I disassembled my old rig and took all the components apart. You could see the power supply I'm using there, the hard drive, the risers, and the video card and the board, and started to kind of really get an idea of how I wanted to put everything together just by holding everything in my hands and just saying, you know, roughly where do I want it and how is it going to work and is it really going to match the CAD drawing that I worked on before. So the most important thing I was worrying about with this was heat. And I've got a lot of components, or just a couple of components that are going to make some heat, mainly the video cards and the power supply. So started looking at my power supply and saying, how does the airflow work? Well, I got the fan on the side. It's going to suck the air in from the side and then basically exhaust out the top. Or it's going to suck in from the top and exhaust out the side. It really all depends on how you want to hold it. And that's kind of the key with this is I kind of get to put this however I want. So which way do I want to put it? As you can see here, when I was playing around with some of the ideas for the power supply and the orientation for the motherboard, I ended up putting the power supply standing up like this with the exhaust facing the front, and the intake is actually on the inside that you can't see. It faces the motherboard. And the reason I did this is because these video cards here, they're not really blower cards where they blow out the back, but they do exhaust a decent amount of heat out the back. So knowing that the heat from the video cards was going to be amplified by 5, and I was going to have a pretty good airflow going that direction, which is to the left, because you can't see, I'm pointing with my hand, I wanted the power supply to blow the same direction. So orientating like this, which while being a little bit, I don't want to say counterintuitive, but you know, I have the power cord here. It's going to be coming out the power supply, and then the graphic card cables coming out the back here. Wasn't going to make for a very neat design, at least in my head at first, but in the end, it ended up coming out all right. So here's another angle where you can see I had the power supply on the motherboard, and all I did here was just cut 2 slabs of wood that were pretty much the same length as these two together, and I was just checking to make sure that my power cords here would reach, which of course they did, and I wanted to see how much slack they had on them to make sure I did have enough, and I was okay. After about 3 or 4 more beers, I cut some more wood and progressed a little bit further. Here you can see that I still have the power supply and the motherboard in the same orientation. I've cut some other pieces of wood for the side, and some stands on the side here too for the piece of wood that's going to be running across this way. And I'm just, again, gauging and trying to get a general idea of how everything's going to work. I have tons of wood, so if nothing really fit, I could always just scrap it and get something new. But everything did kind of work out okay. I tried to get the height set. Ideally, what I was trying to do is wedge this power supply in so that the top of this wood piece that ran across would pretty much run right across the top of it. So once this is all screwed together, that power supply is going to be nestled right in between the top and the bottom wood, and then I could put some pieces in the front and the back to really hold this thing secure. So if I wanted to pick this rack up, I mean, the goal was with this mining rig, I could pick this thing up, turn it any orientation that I wanted, and everything would be securely in place, nothing would fall out, and everything would work good. Here you can see where I actually took the pieces and I was sliding them back a little bit just to see how they would look towards the back of the rig instead of the middle. I cut a piece here for the top, which would actually hold the bar that's going to run across the front, and it's obviously longer than it needs to be, but it was just, I think, the scrap piece of the wood that was left over, and just trying to get a general idea of how everything was going to fit together. Now, I had an interesting dilemma because all the wood I bought was pretty thick, and the piece that I wanted to screw all the video cards to, if I used that wood, would cover my display, my output port that you can see there was actually about half of the display port, and it would cover a pretty good amount of the blower. And that's not really what I'm trying to do here. I don't want to cover any exhaust. And you can see turning the wood that direction doesn't make it better. It only makes it worse. I covered the whole display port and then part of the HDMI port there as well. Well, it turns out I actually had some dowel that I found that was circular. Not the best shape to work with, but it was a lot thinner. It was only about a ½ inch. So I had a choice between that and some aluminum angle there that I had, but really I didn't have a lot of the aluminum, and I wanted to save that for mounting the power supply. So I ended up going with the wooden circular dowel. So here you can see a shot of the rig kind of assembled with the back piece on there, and As of right now, it's only about 17.5 inches wide, a little bit under 8 inches tall, so I'm really doing good as far as my sizing goes. I'm pretty much keeping towards my idea of wanting to keep this as small as I can. One of the issues I did realize, though, is that when I was screwing this in, I was not paying too much attention to the locations of the screw slots, realizing that a couple of them were going to overlap. So what I had to do is be crafty and put a couple of pieces of wood, shift it over a little bit more to the side instead of being flush to the back. Had to countersink some holes to get the screws to go in there. I was dealing with the fact that I had screws that were a little bit too large also, and bits that were too small, so I had to grind off the ends on here. I could have easily fixed this by buying other screws, but I just wanted to keep with what I was using there. Here you can see the front part is on, and it's actually looking pretty well and coming together quite nicely. I basically just took the riser and put it on here, and with one video card, laid it up, and got a general idea of the height and the location of where I needed to put this bar. It's circular, which looks kind of strange because everything else is square, but it's tiny and it's strong. Those circular dowels got some pretty good strength to it. Here's a closer shot of the same kind of angle. So here you can see the width. It's a little under 18 inches. And I've got a depth of a little under 8 right now. And the total height is actually about 12 inches. So pretty small. I would say this is probably one of the smaller 5-card racks that I've seen. So let's see how well this can continue. Video card sits on top nicely. I don't have a board running across for the front right now. I just wanted to put one on the back because, quite honestly, I said the screw in the back here, with the amount of weight in the back of this, will put a lot of pressure here. There's not really a lot of pressure on here once it's plugged in. Obviously, you plug the card into the riser before you mount it. You don't have to have any issues with putting too much pressure down here. And then with the dowel on the front, it's going to hold the front nice and straight. So having the second piece of wood go across didn't seem necessary. There you can see a shot of the back there. And I did intentionally leave these cards hanging off a little bit because some of my power connectors were actually right angle connectors. And I wanted to make sure I left enough room for myself. Here's a little hint. One of the things they never really tell you with these mining rigs is the fact that you can't turn the power to the motherboard on unless you actually have some kind of jumper or something, because generally you're building these without a case, and the cases actually have all the headers and the jumpers you need. So if you're into RC cars, you can just take a standard JST connector with some wires off of a scrap servo, plug this into the header on the motherboard that has the power supply. Generally it's a positive and negative, looks kind of like that. And then all you gotta do is short the two wires out, and voila, you got a power button. So here you can see the back of the rig and the power cords that I have plugged in, and the one there, and I'm trying to figure out how I want to route this. I ended up doing something like this, and what I'm doing right now is training these cords and these cables. I don't plan on leaving these crappy looking twist ties on here, but with the way these cables work, if you put them in a general location of where you want them, tie wrap them up, and let them sit for a little bit, they'll generally stay in that position when you take the tie wrap off. I do plan on putting zip ties or some other kind of connectors on here that look better than what's currently on there, but whenever I'm doing cable routing, I generally just do a rough sketch or a rough idea first before I kind of get into the final zip ties. Here you can see I cut a piece of that angled aluminum and I just screwed it into the back to hold the power supply in place so it wouldn't slide backwards. I actually took some other scrap wood I found upstairs. This is just a 1/4 inch thick piece of 1 inch, 1/4 by 1 inch or 1 1/4 inch paneling wood, or I forgot what they call it. But what I did was mounted the hard drive here to it into the side. I actually had some screws that were the same thread as the mounting slots on the side of the hard drive there, and just screwed them right in. And then if I took that and I basically lined it up to the back here, I had the the hard drive sitting parallel to everything else also. And it tucked away kind of nice and neat under everything else, because again, I'm trying to put everything inside this frame and make everything as small as possible. Here you can see some additional cables hooked up. I have one of the power cords from the power supply here running down, and it branches off to go into the hard drive and then into one of the riser boards. I figured I actually only have one of these riser boards like this with this type of connector, so I figured it'd be a good spot to put it there. That way I can use this one cable that has the two positions to power that. You can see I got the SATA cable just running down here to loop down into the motherboard itself. Here's a shot showing some of the issues I was having with this Corsair power supply. These cords that come out of these things are thick and they don't bend easily. In fact, they just kind of want to do their own thing. So what I ended up doing was gently coiling this around, and it looks like they're tight angles, but they're really not. It's just the way the camera looks. But I coiled this around like this to take up some of that slack and basically zip tied or tie wrap this together to kind of get rid of all this slack here. You can see it comes up, comes out of the power supply here, runs around, comes over, and then basically just turns at an angle and goes straight down into the plug. So it alleviated a rat's nest tangle of cables in there. And all the other little cables, they're going to be the easiest ones to work with. So the big fat cables, I wanted to get them all tied up and taken care of first, and there's pretty much the same kind of picture. So here you can see pretty much the base of what I've got right now, because the way I looked at it is I didn't need to mount all 5 video cards. I just wanted to get at least one working, because I know later then all I gotta do is plug into the power supply here and plug in all these riser cards, screw them all in, get the extension cords to the USB of. They're simple plug and play things to do. So getting the motherboard, the power supply, the hard drive, everything mounted up, and at least one of these set up, I was able to do some testing. So here is the same rig at a different angle. Again, it's like less than 8 inches there, and we're like 17.5 inches, so we're not taking up a lot of space. This thing is pretty tiny. Airflow from all the cards is pretty much going to be blowing forward. Power supply here is going to be drawing air in and then blowing forward. And if you notice, we're drawing air in from the side of the motherboard that doesn't contain the CPU. So less heat going in. But, quite honestly, CPUs in mining rigs do not use a lot of heat. They don't do a lot. In fact, quite honestly, after I did some testing on this rig, I ended up disconnecting the fan because I didn't need it. The thing would just idle at 20 degrees Celsius, even with the fan unplugged. It was ridiculous. Here's the same rig, a different angle. And I have some temporary angled pieces in here. I didn't want to do all the aluminum pieces just yet, but I have that in there just to kind of hold this in place. So you can see it's coming along quite well. Here's a top shot, kind of show you what it looks like from the top. So everything is following some pretty nice straight lines there. This is actually it laying on its front. So this is from the back. I guess I could turn that, but you can get a general gist of what that's going to look like. Here I've got all of the cards set up. And what I actually also have is a completely different motherboard in here, because I realized that I wanted to put the other motherboard in a different rig. So I swapped motherboards and then swapped hard drives. So this is the SSD that I've got in here with this motherboard. And it's working nice. I got the five cards up there. It doesn't take up a lot of space. This is a back view of the rig. Again, I'm kind of just doing testing and getting it all set up, and it's plugged into my my wired LAN over there. So I was getting things in and out and didn't really want to mess with the cleanliness of the cables just yet. So don't be too concerned about that. It does look a lot cleaner at the end, but the spacing and everything worked out and whatnot. Here's a different angle of the back. And you can see how everything kind of came out here. I did realize after I built this rig that I'm not going to have any problem taking these cords and tucking them in and getting them all nice, but the problem really is that they're still going to overhang. And yeah, the rig's small, but the cards and everything here, because it sticks out, it technically adds a little bit of depth to where I have to put this. So I ended up using this as a template, this rig as a template, to make a second rig where it was a little bit longer. And then I have another piece of wood that's going to come up in the back just to kind of help protect everything so I don't have these cables potentially getting damaged. Here's the rig moved over and just kind of set up on a spare shelf right now. It is drawing about 400 watts. That's system power. 400 watts for the 5 cards and the motherboard and everything that's on there. So it's pretty good. I got the cards cranked up. They're about 100% power right now and overclocked and running because it's the winter, it's cold, and I need some heat in my room, so perfectly fine with that. And as a side note, with this rig, with the way I made it, it actually does also mount vertically, as you can see here. So I have the power supply on the top. Basically, I took it and turned it to the left. And the way it's set up right now, again, it's still blowing the heat towards the front, but instead of taking up a lot of vertical space going this way, it's just taking up horizontal space. And the way this works is the power supply, draws in air from the bottom and blows it out towards the front. The fan, the fans here pretty much just draw in all the ambient air and blow out the front here also. So it's pretty small, pretty compact. So I gotta say, I was pretty pleased with it. And one last update here. I did end up installing those aluminum pieces into the front there, into the power supply. You can see the 2 black screws. Where's it? Here and here. Basically, these are the screws that came with the power supply. So I just drilled some holes in the angled aluminum and stuck that in there, and then basically screwed this down in here. There's another one on the other side. So the power supplies are mounted quite well to these racks. So again, I could move these things around and not have to worry about it. And I actually ended up installing some push buttons into the power and the reset switches on the motherboard here. And basically, I was going to buy some switches on eBay because I didn't have anything here besides toggle switches. And it turns out I had an old Arduino kit that had a whole bunch of switches and knobs and dials and all that stuff in it. And I said, you know what, man? Hell yeah, I'm just going to use those. So got some hot glue here, threw that on the bottom, and slapped them in. And I got a power and a reset switch. Just got to label them so I know which is which, but came out pretty well. And quick update, I'll actually do a second video on this thing here, but this is the second rack I started making for the other rig that I'm going to run up. And again, it pretty much borrows the same dimensions from the first one I made, except for the fact that I added a second shelf here. I still have tons of wood left over. I figured, it's only an extra 5 minutes to cut the wood and screw this thing in, so I did that, and I ended up making this a little bit wider in the back. Remember before it went to about here and then stopped? I ended up making this a little bit wider, so it actually goes back more, and it'll allow me to take this and push this up against the wall without having to worry about hitting any of these cables or running into anything. And long term, if I needed some additional cooling, I can actually use this rack in the back here, have some posts screw straight up onto it, mount some fans on it, and have the fans blow to the right. So the airflow is always going from the back to the front on this rig. So I hope you enjoyed this video. You got any questions, let me know. I'll certainly try to help you out. Hey, I just want to say thank you to everyone for watching the video. If you like what you saw, you want to show your support, you can give me a thumbs up. If you don't like what you saw, just turn your monitor upside down and smack that thumbs down button. I swear it actually works. I've actually done detailed testing on different video cards over the last couple of weeks with different miners using different websites, and been tracking all my data along with finishing up my second budget rig. I've been into crypto lately, I don't know if you can tell, but I'll be making more crypto videos on my progress, as well as finally releasing that update to Fishmonger that includes compatibility for Wrath of the Lich King private servers, some bug fixes to vanilla, and a couple other goodies, likely after the big game this weekend. Yeah, that's what it's called. So stay subscribed to see more, and if you want any gear that I used, you can check out the Amazon affiliate links. I should be adding sometime soon to the description below. So, ciao!